This is flabbergasting. So it's like almost, it's just the massive majority of physical therapists and manual handling advisors are saying, let's keep a neutral spine. But despite that, despite the data that they've just obtained, these guys know best. These guys think that they know best and are dismissing what the real world is telling you. Good morning. I hope you've all had a wonderful Easter. Back to work now and doing a little bit more reading in the back pain space. Came across this very interesting article written by our friend Mr. Peter O'Sullivan, Kieran O'Sullivan. I recognise these names because they write a lot about back pain. Haven't read so much from Nolan, Lucock or Stevenson, but this is the paper, February 18. I think I did read it some years back, but it's come up on my radar. It's really quite interesting because of the conclusions that they arrive at, despite the actual data that they obtain. What do physiotherapists and manual handling advisors consider to be the safest lifting posture, and do back pain beliefs influence their choice? So let's have a look at the abstract and what they did. So firstly, they're saying that it's commonly believed lifting is dangerous and the back should be straight during lifting. So number one, this is not a very good term. Straight is not a good term. It's not anatomical. We should be using the term neutral, or with intralumbar flexion, or with intralumbar extension. This is just not a good term. These beliefs may arise from healthcare professionals, yet no study has evaluated the lifting and back beliefs of manual handling advisors. So they kind of need studies to sort of back up their preconceived bias. Like, let's get some studies rather than just common sense. Yep, studies is fine, but when common sense still needs to prevail. So what are the objectives? To evaluate what lifting technique manual handling advisors and physiotherapists perceive as safest and why. So how did they do the study? Participants selected the safest lifting posture from 4 options. So they were shown photographs, 2 with a straight back, again using the wrong term, 2 with a more rounded back, again not a very good term, but at least it's better than straight, because straight doesn't give any indication about neutrality or the inclined position of the back. Back beliefs were collected via the Back Pain Attitudes questionnaire. And let's see what the results were. So 400 physiotherapists and manual handling advisors completed the survey. 75% of physiotherapists and 91% of manual handling advisors chose a straight lifting posture as safest, mostly on the basis that it avoided intralumbar flexion. Okay. So that's quite resonating, that 75% of physiotherapists, 91% of manual handling advisors believed that a neutral spine was better. Let's have a look at the photographs that were shown to the 400 people tested, 400 people questioned. Okay, so here are the 4 photographs that were used in the article. Remember, 400 people made up of physiotherapists and manual handling advisors were asked to comment on these lifting techniques or spine positions. Photograph A, we've got a nice neutral spine position. We've got hip-centric rotation, posterior kinetic chain activation. So this really does sound very much like the NeuroHab movement points of performance for movement proficiency during bending tasks. Photograph D, we have a similar position with the neutral spine, hip-centric rotation, posterior kinetic chain-powered movement. The only real difference here is that we've got a slightly more inclined position in order to do the lift. This is a sort of more squat stance. This is a little bit more deadlift stance. The knees are slightly more anterior in the squat position. That still meets the movement points of performance of NeuroHab because the knees are unloaded, because the posterior kinetic chain is active as opposed to a kneel. When you're kneeling, the knees are loaded and the posterior kinetic chain is deactivated. So that would be breaking movement points of proficiency. Now, in photograph B and C, we can see that we've broken one of the rules of NeuroHab with intra-lumbar flexion quite markedly there. And again, in photograph C, we've got some intra-lumbar flexion sneaking in. Our knees are slightly anterior as well, and posterior kinetic chain would not be as active in this position. And therefore we're sort of starting to get some knee loading as well. So this is moving more towards a kneel rather than a deadlift as opposed to this position. Okay, so not only can you see it, but when you actually understand this type of movement, you can feel it in your body when you're activating your posterior kinetic chain, and you can really feel those spinal extensors and stabilizers in action. Now, what was the results? This is what we all want to know. What were the results of the 400 people? 75% of them, 75% of the physiotherapists said photograph A and D was the optimal lifting and bending technique. 90% of manual handling advisors also said A and D. So remember, that's 400 people, 75% or 90% all said this was better and this was better. Okay, A and D were better. Okay, and let's just see what the final conclusions of the authors was. Okay, so here we are back at the paper again, looking at the results. Remember, 400 PTs and manual handling. 75% of PTs and 91% of manual handling advisors chose a straight lifting posture as safest. All right, so that's pretty profound. The conclusion: avoiding rounding the back while lifting is a common belief in PTs and manual handling advisors, despite the lack of evidence that any specific spinal posture is a risk factor for low back pain. Manual handling advisors and those who perceive the straight back position as safest had significantly more negative back pain beliefs. So this is flabbergasting. So it's almost, it's just the massive majority of physical therapists and manual handling advisors are saying, let's keep a neutral spine. But despite that, despite the data that they've just obtained, these guys know best. These guys think that they know best and are dismissing what the real world is telling you. Keep a neutral spine, maintain movement proficiency. This is just unbelievable that the findings that they've just observed in their own research, they are unwavering in their belief that maintaining a neutral spine during bending tasks is without evidence. Now, they're just making this up, despite the lack of evidence that any specific spinal posture is. Of course it is a risk factor. Of course it is a risk factor. You take it into context with repetition over time, into context with demand versus load, into context where stability is maintained, and then you'll absolutely understand that maintaining a neutral spine position as your default movement proficiency technique is absolutely critical. So this is crazy. They've got the information staring at them in the face, and despite that, they still ignore it. It's madness.